Hi, I'm Dr. Beth Molleson.
And I'm Dr. Alyssa Watson.
And I'm Dr. Katie Berlin.
Thank you all for joining us in the Veterinary Breakroom. These are short conversations where we chat informally about relevant topics in vet med. And today we are going to be talking about a topic that I'm sure some of you have seen floating around the internet or floating around discussions in your own break room. And that is having to do with the AAVMC, so the Veterinary Medical College Organization, who commissioned a workforce report that came out earlier this year. That report wound up getting withdrawn, but we will get into that. So basically, most of us that are in the veterinary profession know that there has been somewhat of an ongoing debate on the workforce. Are there shortages of veterinarians? Are there surpluses? Are there niche shortages in certain either geographical markets or certain types of veterinary medicine? And so multiple organizations have sought to kind of get the answer, quote unquote, and it is turning out to be very difficult. It's a difficult thing to assess, and so the AVMA has worked to assess this. The AAVMC that I just mentioned has worked to assess this, and so again, bringing us back to the AAVMC commissioned and released a workforce report. I believe it was in March. And so we will kind of dive into what was in that report. But Katie and Alyssa, have you guys seen this talked about much or heard it floating around in your social circles, this discussion?
So I haven't really seen it as much online as I have we've had some discussions, especially with several of the colleagues at Clinicians Brief about it. But I haven't seen this particular one as much online. And I know there was, I think, a VIN article about it recently. I did see that one quickly, but I haven't been on VIN that much recently, I guess. I don't know. What about you, Katie?
Yeah, I actually was aware of the report only after the Women's Veterinary Leadership Development Initiative, or WVALDI, made a statement, like kind of a rebuttal statement. And when I read their statement, then I became aware of the AAVMC's report and went back and looked. But at that point, they'd actually pulled it already. When I heard about it, they'd pulled it from the website, but you can still find it online in PDF form. But that's how I learned about it, because I had colleagues who were talking about some parts of the report that they took issue with in particular, which we will get to shortly. But of course, that's how we learn about things these days, is when there's controversy about them. So that's when it went on my radar.
Isn't that the truth? I really didn't hear about it in March when the AAVMC released this report. Like you said, yeah. Katie, I only started to hear about it after it was retracted, ironically. And so to get into a little bit of more details about what's being discussed, well, the overview is that the AVMA predicts that there's going to be a surplus of I believe, about 8,000 companion animal vets in the year 2030. The AAVMC predicts that there's going to be about 14,000 to 24,000 companion animal vet deficit by 2030. So those are vastly different numbers. However, this discrepancy has nothing to do with why the report was pulled. Like Katie said, WVALDI, which is the Women Vet Leadership Development Initiative, released a statement, I believe, in April, discussing that they felt like, and you guys can chime in here because I know you've taken a little bit of a look at it, but the overall takeaway was discussing that women were not fairly represented in that commissioned report, and the overall lack of kind of diversity and inclusion discussion, and how that weighs into things. And that, in fact, is what the AAVMC is citing for having withdrawn that. So I kind of wanted to really hone in on that. Like we said, the workforce issue is so complicated. Like, reading about this had me feeling exhausted and overwhelmed and feeling like I have no idea how it's other people's area of expertise, but it seems very over my head to figure out how you even go about making these assessments. I know one of the AVMA's biggest issues was that they said this report, kind of the language that was used made it sound like this data is definitive, which can lead to recommendations for kind of far-reaching proposals and very dramatic changes in the industry, such as initiating a mid-level practitioner model of veterinary medicine, or as we've seen, relaxing some of the VCPR regulations in telehealth. And so that's what they cited as kind of their issue with it, not to mention the number discrepancy. But let's see, Katie, did you, I know you looked a little bit at the report from Vivaldi. What was your takeaway? Or when you also looked at the AAVMC report, like, was that your first thought? Did you kind of understand where they were coming from with the issues that they brought up?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, admittedly, I have many opinions about these things before, as most of us do, I think, before I ever read Vivaldi's statement or went to look at the AAVMC report, or AVMA's rebuttal. I have a lot of preformed opinions, and I would say that this conversation hasn't really changed any of them. But when I first looked at Vivaldi's statement and the bits of it that were being sort of shared widely online, it struck a couple of notes with me. So, some of the points that they were talking about, specifically where gender is involved, were, sort of the idea that, like, because women make up the majority of the veterinary workforce now, that could be why we're seeing a shortage, because women got into this career basically and I'm going to summarize here, paraphrase here, basically because the demands of it are not as rigorous as going into human medicine. So you don't have to do a residency, and maybe there's better chance for work-life balance. And I admit that this is something that I have actually said, like, earlier in my career. I actually remember hearing this information and absorbing it and being like, oh, well, that makes sense. Like, they're more flexible, like part-time options, you spend less time in schools, you can have a family earlier. Being that now I am in my mid-40s and do not have a family and still don't want to work 60 hours a week, and I'm glad that I did not do a residency, I am not sure that was fair of me. So I definitely agree that that even if that's a factor, bringing it to the forefront of being like, this is why we're short. This is a big reason why we don't have enough vets, whether or not that's true, seemed poorly handled to me. So I definitely, that resonated with me, just simply because I know that those things have left my mouth and they don't anymore.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to phrase it, Katie, because in that AAVMC report, like you said, they're kind of grasping at reasons for why there is, or we think maybe, a shortage by 2030 of this profound number. And like you said, one of the things they pointed to a lot was women. And, to play, I guess, maybe a little bit of devil's advocate, I do almost like feel for them, because you have to, I think what we hate to see is we hate to see generalities placed on any group of people, because we know that just universally what's true for one person, or even the majority of people, is not true for everyone. And so, it's almost, I could see how it's hard to write this report and make it feel like you're representing the truth for everyone. And so a lot of what is called out in the report is like, women work fewer hours, but like you said, it's just like 2 fewer hours or something throughout the week, but they're using that as a reason why there's a shortage. I think we're really getting into hot water when we start talking about why more women want to be vets. Is it that lack of residency? And I just think there's so many hot button topics that we're like trying to wade through, that I am not like, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's a little bit hard for me to envision how they would pull the report together without maybe causing a little bit of controversy. That being said, I certainly could point out some places where they could have used more inclusive language, or, hey, maybe slap a woman on, and I shouldn't say slap a woman, involve a woman, heavily involve a woman in putting together this report so that you have that representation there. I think that was one of the things that probably didn't sit very well with people, is that this is a report made by men, and yet, it talks a lot about findings about women, which never, I think, goes over super well.
And I'd just like to point out too, like you said, so the report says that in 2017, male veterinarians worked on average 45.01 hours per week, while female veterinarians worked 42.92 hours per week. And last I checked, that was still more than full-time. Like 40 hours is a full-time job. And regardless of whether you have family at home, like 40 hours is considered a full-time job. And so I do feel like that is a bit unfair, not just because male veterinarians were only working a little bit more on average, but also because, that's still a perfectly respectable work week, and in fact would be considered overtime for an hourly employee. So
absolutely. And, obviously with 80+% of the workforce being women, that is talked about a lot throughout the report. Another big thing they evaluated when trying to assess the shortage was generational difference. Of course, we're having baby boomers that are leaving the profession due to age. We're having more Gen Z and millennials come into the profession. And so that was talked about a lot. Alyssa, I want to hear your thoughts on this. I know we've talked
Alyssa and I are both smiling.
Yeah. We've talked about you take it, Alyssa.
Because they completely skipped over Gen X again. This trend is so funny to me. And so there have been multiple times where a report or something will come out and they'll talk about generational differences, and they'll pit baby boomers against millennials. And I've even seen, graphics from major news organizations, CNN and Fox News and stuff, that'll list out the generations all the way back to like the silent generation. And Gen X is just missing. It's like there were no children born between, 1980 or 1965 and 1980. Our generation wasn't there. And they did the same thing in this report.
I think you guys are just like the cooperative middle child. I would take it as a compliment.
I mean, either that or we're like Judd Nelson at detention with our Walkman. Like we just can't be bothered. Like, I don't know. It's either we're cooperative or apathetic. I don't know.
Apathetic. It's that whole, latchkey generation where we just kind of all did it on our own. We came home, we let ourselves in, we made,
mac and cheese
after school. We got our homework done. Our parents finally got home around, 6, 7 o'clock. We put ourselves to bed. That was it.
Went to college, became a vet, and just did your work, is what this report makes it sound like.
And like I said, and apparently we're not taking over anything or replacing anybody. We're just a placeholder till those millennials come in.
It'll be interesting to see. I wonder if it's because you are like that middle child right now. It'll be interesting to see if in 15, 20 years, it's all talk of Gen X and Gen Z. We'll see.
Maybe. Yeah.
But, in that report, of course, trying to hash out this veterinary shortage, there is a lot of discussion. That's where, in my mind, too, there's, to me, reading it, there were a few like cringe-worthy moments in reading the report, because it's talked about how boomers and, hopefully I'm paraphrasing adequately, but boomers were more loyal to their workplace, more committed, willing to work more hours. Millennials, who knows what Gen X is doing, like we said, but millennials are, maybe
we know what we're doing.
Less loyal.
No one asked us, but we know.
So millennials less loyal, more likely to value that work-life balance. And that's what really got me, was thinking about the population of vets who are retiring and the baby boomers who are vets. We've got majority males. And I'm just thinking about how a male working, let's say their career started in the 1980s, 1970s, 1980s, don't make me do the math, somewhere in there. And what percentage of them had a stay-at-home spouse or stay-at-home wife that really made all the difference? So there was something like offensive to me as a millennial, working mother who has no option to work more hours than I'm already working because I don't have someone cooking me dinner and, just providing this complete outside of the office life for me. So there was something about that wording that got to me a little bit too.
Looking to protect your canine patients against parasites? Look no further than Simparica Trio, Serolaner Moxidectin and Pyrantel chewable tablets. The first chewable to offer triple protection from heartworm disease, ticks and fleas, and roundworms and hookworms. It's also FDA approved to block infections that may cause Lyme disease by killing deer ticks.
Use with caution in dogs with a history of seizures. Serolaner belongs to the isoxazoline class, which has been associated with neurologic adverse reactions. The most common side effects were vomiting and diarrhea.
Visit SimparicaTrioDVM.com for full prescribing information.
Yeah, and the Vivaldi statement did acknowledge that, as part of this, the AAVMC's report, they were acknowledging the need for women to still take on a lot more of that household labor, so like picking up the kids at daycare and making sure that everybody has food at night and, handling kids like school responsibilities and things. They did acknowledge by talking about this that women still carry a greater amount of that responsibility in most households. And I definitely know some stay-at-home dads who support their wives who are practice owners. And just a note here, because we have talked about this, but haven't said it today, which is when we say women, we're talking about, generally speaking, people who identify as women and carry that more traditional women's role in the household, because that really is the case. Like, it hasn't changed all that much for all that many people, I think. And so acknowledging that is good, that women still carry a greater than 50% share of those responsibilities. But it just felt a little bit icky.
Right. Well, you can acknowledge that fact without this, there seemed to be this undertone of like, oh, what women really want is to be, home baking cookies, not at work, and like, that's not, that's not exactly how it is. So that there, and I kind of bringing that back up to the other thing they had talked about, with the women go into veterinary medicine as opposed to human medicine because it's just easier. There's less time commitment, the residency thing that bothered me. That is not my personal experience, and so, and it's not the experience of a lot of the vets I know. A lot of the vets I know wanted to be a vet from the time that they were, tiny kids. Like I knew I wanted to be a vet from the time I was 5 years old. I never wanted to be a ballerina. I never wanted to be an astronaut. And I certainly, absolutely 100% never, ever, ever wanted to be a human doctor ever. Like, we were talking about how people are gross. Like, we have coffee mugs that say people are gross.
I'll have to look closer at the report, but I wonder if that was at all based, because, I think some of this, like I said, to play the devil's advocate a little bit, I do feel like this is a hard report to make without trying to represent everyone. So I'm curious, I wonder if there are like survey results that support that that's why women, got into veterinary medicine. Maybe there is data to back up the reasons why. I don't know. But certainly that's where I think like a woman involved in the production of this report would have gone a long way. Because I think in a lot of this, it's not necessarily the facts that are wrong. I think it's a little bit the presentation that lacked maybe a little bit more of that inclusive verbiage was kind of my takeaway.
You're making me feel really guilty, Beth, because sitting in my inbox for the last 2 weeks has been an invitation for a survey from the AAVMA. I know, like on a snapshot of the profession right now, we want to know, your opinion. And I know it's so important to take the time to do that so we can get the data that you're talking about. But just like everything else, life gets in the way, but I'm going to do that.
Right. No, I totally get it.
I wanted to bring up, there's a passage in the AAVMC report about these millennial archetypes. Since we're talking about millennials, like I'm assuming that some Gen X, like late Gen Xers like us, will bleed into that a little bit. But there are these 3 millennial archetypes that they cite, and they're different in terms of like their priorities. So these are sort of 3 different characterizations of people in the millennial generation who you find in the workforce. And one is called social investors, who care about the quality of their work, personal development, and social relationships at work, but their first priority is their home, family, and work-life balance. Okay. Second archetype, chill worker bees. I love these names. Chill worker bees, who value job security and physical and emotional safety. They want clear communication and instructions from their superiors so they don't make mistakes. And then the third archetype is called go-getters, who prioritize professional development, opportunities for growth, and regular feedback. And like social investors, go-getters place a high priority on the ethics and morality of their work and its impact on society. So those are supposedly the 3 sort of, as cited by this author, or these authors in a 2021 report. These 3 archetypes represent the majority of types of millennial workers. And I feel like these are all like these 3 archetypes are all people who care really deeply and want to work really hard, whether it be with their family at home or at work. But they all want relationships. They all prioritize feedback. They want opportunities for growth. They want to feel psychologically safe. Like, I feel like these are good things. And I'm not really sure why millennials are getting such a bad rap for not wanting to work, when all along from the beginning, it's been like, actually, we want to work. We need support because we don't want to end up like you. And like, I don't know if that's something that, we're getting to be more willing to accept, that like the millennial psychology is actually really beneficial to society as a whole,
Right.
or whether I just feel like maybe it's getting a little bit more accepted because I am essentially an exennial and surrounded by them all the time.
I mean, my first thought when I read the descriptions, Katie, is like, what did they really want to write that they can't? Like, I feel like there weren't any negative qualities in any of those. And yet when millennials are assessed, certainly it's not all roses and sunshine. And I would argue that somewhere underlying those are some maybe more negative qualities that people would assign. But I'm kind of with you that I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with your assessment of that overall millennial vibe, so to speak. And to me, it kind of gets back to the idea of women, where when we do skip over the Gen X and compare us to baby boomers, to me, like, that workforce has changed, not just in vet med, but changed so drastically to be more female, a higher percentage of female. And so with that, I do think you get this complete change in value. You also lose that stay-at-home partner, and so your values at the workplace like have to change. So to me, it almost does come back to that gender discussion that we're having to kind of find that more of that work-life balance, because there's no choice.
Yeah. And I think it's not just in, veterinary medicine either. It's and talking about, going back to the whole point of this, which was, is there going to be a deficit, and do we need more schools? Do we need more slots opening up? Should we be graduating more veterinarians? I think that was kind of like the focus of this at the beginning. And there are more women going to school, going to college. They say that more women are entering vet school. Well, more women are entering medical school too, and have been, since about, I think, over half of the women entering medical school are women since like 2016 or 2018. So it's not just our profession. And the broader discussion about, okay, if more women are entering the workforce, or more women are going, going for higher education and degrees, what are the men doing? Are men going back into, more trades? I don't know. I think that those are things to be looking at too.
Yeah, the question of whether there's a true shortage, it feels like we are overemphasizing that to me. Like there might well be a shortage. It's so much data on either side that I don't. I mean, we have what 10, 12 new veterinary schools like opening in the next few years. There are going to be more vets, but if, as I think they cited in here, like in recent years, 40% of veterinarians were considering leaving the profession before retirement. Like it doesn't help to graduate them all, especially since a lot of these are for-profit colleges where people are going to end up with a lot of debt and still want to leave the profession because they're being poured into a profession that isn't going to sustain them, not necessarily because they can't find a job, but because they can't find a job that they want to stay at.
Right.
And I do think the burnout factor in this report, it feels like they talk about it, but it feels minimized to me, that like if we don't fix the system first, then the numbers are not going to matter. And it's just going to actually end up being more people who are disillusioned with the profession they thought they always wanted to be in.
Right. And I think, go ahead, Alyssa.
Oh, I was going to say, it just goes back to those archetypes that you were talking about. Like, we need to find a way to support people in the profession so that they don't, that they're not coming in and leaving, and not just veterinarians, technicians, support staff, the turnover we've talked about there too. And so, everything, it's so complicated, and it's such a web that it's difficult to pick out things. And I think, like you have been saying the whole episode, Beth, it's just a difficult thing to try to pick out and to zero in on, oh, this is the root cause here. And I think you're going to end up really upsetting somebody when we try to pick out one or two things that are the cause, but at the same time, you want to find something that's actionable, otherwise what's the point if you don't find something actionable?
And I think, we didn't have much time to touch on this during this discussion, but I think at least one of the refreshing points of the report was that it certainly acknowledged burnout. I think, Katie, like you said, though, like that should potentially be one of the more actionable areas, I would think. We're not going to like change that this is a women-led profession or women majority profession, but is that burnout something that should be more aggressively tackled? I think that is my understanding, is that's where a fair amount of the discrepancy in that shortage versus surplus comes from, is like, are we going to lose that 40% to burnout? And so, I think that's one of the interesting takeaways of this report, was how impactful that is. Not that that's a surprise to any of us that are in the profession, but it's always kind of somewhat validating to see it on paper and to see those numbers brought to light. I think to end this on a somewhat positive note, that when the AVMA wrote their, I guess you would call it a rebuttal, or their response to the AAVMC report, the CEO and president kind of suggested in that letter that maybe this is a time where they do another joint collaborative investigation on the workforce. So they have done those in the past. I think it's been about 10 or 15 years since their last one, but potentially there's more to come there. So I do encourage everyone to read these reports, read these letters, read the Vivaldi comments, because it is all very interesting, and it does impact all of us in the industry over the next decade or two. So, but I think that brings us to our wins of the week. If anyone has one, we can end this on a positive.
I'll start. So my win of the week, I'm going non-clinical this week. I went clinical last time. My win of the week is we got our house painted. So I'm so excited. The inside of our house, we painted the inside of our house. So I have this blank wall behind me now because we took down all the pictures and everything in our whole house, and filled all the holes in the wall and got a brand new coat of paint. And it's very relaxing. It's a beautiful, soothing color. I'm glad I picked it. But this is going to be fun. And hopefully over the next several episodes, we'll start to see some things pop up behind me.
I love it. And you outsourced it, right? This wasn't you having to paint every wall.
Oh gosh, no. We hired someone to paint our house.
I love it. That's nothing like a fresh start. Katie, what about you? Any big wins this week, or small wins for that matter?
Well, I've packed the last week or so with fun events. And I do this every year around this time. It's mid-May right now because May is historically a hard month for me personally for multiple reasons. And so I actually have been super social, which is sometimes not always that positive for me, but in this case it is. And I went to my first NBA game at Ball Arena this week, and because the Nuggets were playing in round 2 of the playoffs, and it was game 5, and it was very exciting, and like I am fully hooked now. Like that vibe was a good vibe, and I want more of that. And basketball, for people who did not grow up like, who are kind of like me, go sports, like sports hard.
Yay,
good sportsing.
Sports.
Yeah. For people like me, basketball is very easy to follow. It's fast. You don't have to like sit around wondering when they're going to start playing again. And it was just a really exciting game. So I have like a sweatshirt now.
I was going to say, Katie, I'm going to hold you to this. The newest. The newest Denver Nuggets. Is that the right team? Newest Denver Nuggets fan. All right. I'm going to check in next season and see how you're holding up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it doesn't hurt that the Nuggets are really good right now because we have a couple of really good players. So
it makes it more fun.
But
yes, we'll see how you're faring.
It's always fun to root for a winner. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Playoffs is the right time to get into a sport, I think.
Exactly. Yeah. It was definitely a good introduction to basketball.
I love it. Oh, well, good. I'm glad the month is going okay for you. I am going to take mine back to vet med, somewhat related to our conversation today. And this is technically more than a week ago, but Katie, I know you'll know where I'm going with this. And that is that we had a visit to the Ohio State University, my vet school alma mater, to check out something neat that they have created there. They have what's called a Spectrum of Care clinic, and it's not connected to their specialty hospital. It's across the parking lot. And we were invited to tour and observe and learn all about the university's approach to spectrum of care, which I know we've brought up on this podcast a little bit from time to time, just talking about really embracing something that is more recent to be embraced in vet med, and that is the idea of that financial spectrum of care. So it was a really great trip, fun to be back on an academic campus, and fun to see all those new little vets being produced that we were talking about.
That was a great trip. Like, you're so right. That was such a big win. I just left feeling really energized and excited to see what this new vet generation will do, because we met a couple we met one of the graduating students, and she was so impressive.
Yes.
I mean, wish
to be there on the first, exactly. She seemed very confident, very well prepared. We also got to see a group of students on their very first day of clinics, which is like nothing more, exciting to talk about excitement for the future in vet med. So anyway, well, this has been a great conversation. To our audience, thank you all for listening in, and we will catch you guys next episode. Thank you for joining us in the Veterinary Breakroom. If you enjoyed today's episode, you can find us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, including the video version on YouTube. While you're there, make sure you subscribe, rate, and review. You can also listen to or watch our podcast episodes on our website at cliniciansbrief.com/podcasts, or drop us a line at podcasts@vetmedics.com. Veterinary Breakroom is a Vetmedics production, produced by Alexis Ussery and co-hosted by Dr. Alyssa Watson and Dr. Beth Molleson.